where I was at with my assorted addictions, so I felt very in control of it in one hand.
Scooped him up there, took out a straw, see you dead. And I did a little line of him, yeah.
Rock and roll has always promised rebellion, freedom, and apparently a liver of steel. While some strummed guitars and changed music history, others were chugging whiskey like it was holy water. From snorting ashes to vodka marathons, the backstage of rock's golden era reads more like a cautionary tale than a dream. So buckle up. We're diving into the chaotic lives of the legends who drank like they played loud, reckless, and without an off switch. Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness and questionable decisions.
One last thing, if you have any drugs or any alcohol.
Before he was a reality TV dad mumbling through breakfast, Ozzy Osbourne was the unfiltered chaos of rock and roll. He wasn't just the frontman of Black Sabbath. He was the guy who bit the head off a bat on stage and thought that was a perfectly normal Tuesday. Ozzy's affair with alcohol didn't begin in fame's glow. It started in his teenage years when the world felt heavy and booze felt light. As success exploded, so did his demons. He drank to numb the pressure, to silence the noise, and sometimes just because it was Tuesday. There was that infamous moment in Texas when he urinated on the Alamo in a blackout stupor, earning him a lifetime ban from the city. Yet beneath the madness was a man clawing his way through addiction, surviving against the odds. With the fierce love of his wife Sharon, and more than a few trips to rehab. Ozzy didn't just recover, he returned and sobered, and still somehow unmistakably Ozzy. Because in the end, even darkness can find its way back to the light, preferably with a mic in hand and a little less Jack Daniels. Keith Richards, the man who outdrank time itself. If rock and roll had a patron saint of survival, it'd be Keith Richards, preferably sculpted from cigarette ash and guitar strings. The Rolling Stones guitarist didn't just flirt with death. He practically married it, divorced it, and kept it on speed dial. Through the 1960s and 70s, Keith was less a man and more a walking pharmacy. Legend has it, he spent entire tours perpetually buzzed, yet somehow played with soul swagger and a cigarette never quite falling from his lip. He once admitted to snorting his dad's ashes mixed with cocaine. Because, well, Keith.
Scooped him up there, took out a straw, see you dead. And I did a little line of him, yeah.
But behind the myth is something rarer: resilience. Every overdose scare, every brush with the law, every morning after could have been his last, but wasn't. He didn't clean up overnight, but he slowed down, choosing guitars over chaos. At 80, he's still standing, still playing, and still defying science. If that's not inspiring, or at least impressively stubborn, we don't know what is. John Bonham, the thunder that burned too bright. They called him Bonzo, and when his drumsticks hit the kit, it sounded like thunder had joined a rock band. John Bonham didn't just play for Led Zeppelin, he powered it. His rhythms were primal, precise, and louder than a jet engine. But off stage, his volume didn't dial down. Bonham had a deep relationship with vodka, one he nurtured like a tragic romance. Stage fright, anxiety, the crushing weight of fame he drank to fight them all. Often before shows, sometimes during, always dangerously. One night the music stopped. After consuming what witnesses say was 40 shots of vodka, Bonham passed out and never woke up, choking in his sleep at Jimmy Page's house. He was just 32. His death sent shockwaves through rock. But what remains is not just a cautionary tale. It's the raw memory of a man who played with passion too big for his body whose thunder still echoes every time those drums come crashing in. Sometimes brilliance blazes too bright to last, but oh, how it lights the sky. Vince Neil. Fast cars, hard liquor, and the weight of regret. Vince Neil wasn't just the voice of Motley Crue. He was its wild heart, wrapped in leather and chaos. He sang about girls, booze, and speed and lived every word like a dare. Off stage, the party never ended. On stage, it just got louder. But in 1984, the music stopped. Drunk behind the wheel of a sports car, Vince crashed. His friend Razzle of Hanoi Rocks died. Vince survived with a jail sentence, a broken heart, and a stain no amount of fame could wash away.
I don't need criticism. When you're singing.
He served just weeks, but the guilt stayed longer. Vince kept drinking, kept spiraling, trying to outrun what happened that night. But regret, like a hangover, always finds you in the morning. And yet there's something defiant in his survival. He's stumbled, yes, but he's also stood back up, mic in hand. Because sometimes rock stars don't shatter, they crack, they break, and somehow they keep singing. Nikki Sixx, dancing with the devil and coming back alive. Nikki Sixx didn't just live the rock and roll lifestyle. He practically wrote the instruction manual, then overdosed on it. As Motley Crue's bassist, he was equal parts musical genius and walking caution tape, mixing heroin with vodka like it was soda and ice. His life in the 80s was a blur of backstage debauchery, near-death overdoses, and journal entries soaked in despair. In fact, The Heroin Diaries, his brutally honest memoir, reads like a horror story scored to heavy metal, bloody veins, broken mirrors, and moments of raw humanity buried beneath eyeliner and leather.
What were you on, heroin?
I was on heroin, coke, pills, alcohol.
All at once?
Yeah, all at once. Why just...
But Nikki didn't just survive. He came back swinging. After flatlining, yes, literally, he cleaned up, got sober, and turned his story into fuel for others. He became an advocate, a voice for the broken, and proof that even in the darkest alleyways of addiction, there's a door back to the light. Because sometimes the man who falls the hardest is the one who rises with fire in his eyes. Vince Neil. Slash, top hat. Les Paul and a liver that deserves a medal. Slash looked like a cartoon character drawn by a rock god. Towering top hat, face lost behind curls, and a Gibson Les Paul slung low like a weapon. He didn't just play guitar, he bled it. But behind that cool, slouching swagger was a man spiraling into the bottom of a Jack Daniels bottle. In the late 80s and early 90s, Slash was rarely seen without his trademark drink in hand, on stage, backstage, sometimes face down in a hotel hallway. His hands knew the fretboard better than his own memory on some nights. He once drank so much, so often, he forgot how to play his own songs mid-show.
Where I was at with my assorted addictions, so I felt very in control of it in one hand.
Alcohol wasn't alone, heroin followed, then heart failure, and one too many close calls. Doctors told him he'd die in 6 months if he didn't stop. He chose to live. And that's the twist. Slash got clean. He climbed out of the wreckage of addiction and walked back into the light with the same guitar, the same swagger, but a new kind of strength. Because redemption doesn't always wear a halo. Sometimes it wears a top hat. Billy Idol. The rebel yell that nearly broke the hotel. Billy Idol strutted into the 1980s like a sneer with a soundtrack. With his bleached spikes, leather pants, and permanently raised eyebrow, he wasn't just a rock star. He was punk's pretty boy troublemaker with a knack for catchy chaos. But Billy didn't just rebel on stage, he rebelled against gravity, sobriety, and hotel furniture. His drinking sprees were legendary. One infamous binge in a luxury hotel in Bangkok lasted 3 weeks, ended with $250,000 in damages, and required the military to escort him out. Rock and roll right. Yet beneath the smashed glass and mascara sweat was a man unraveling. The high life became hollow. The mirror once his friend started asking questions he couldn't answer, drunk. So he changed. Billy cleaned up. The rage turned into resilience. The excess gave way to endurance. And that rebel yell, still there, older, wiser, and maybe just a little less likely to punch a wall. Because even punks grow up. Some just do it with eyeliner still on. Duff McKagan, a gallon of vodka a day keeps the pancreas away or not. If Slash was the wild-haired gunslinger of Guns N' Roses, Duff McKagan was the cool blonde heartbeat pounding underneath the chaos. He looked like a surfer lost in a biker gang, but make no mistake, Duff could drink most sailors under the table, and then drink the table. At the peak of his addiction, he was downing a gallon of vodka a day. Yes, a gallon. His insides were basically a distillery. It caught up with him in 1994 when his pancreas literally exploded like a not-so-subtle memo from his body titled, "You're not invincible." Doctors told him he'd die if he had another drink. That tends to grab a man's attention. Duff quit. Cold turkey. He found sobriety in sweat, switching vodka for martial arts mountain bikes, and a lifestyle that didn't end in an ambulance. Now he's not just alive, he's thriving. A reminder that sometimes, even after setting fire to your own life, you can rise from the smoke stronger than before. Rod Stewart. Coke in a cold capsule, swagger in a suit. Rod Stewart had the voice of a gravel road, kissed by moonlight, and the party habits of a man who never read a warning label. In the 70s, with The Faces, Rod didn't just sing about wild nights. He lived them, loudly, in designer suits. But here's the twist. While most rock stars snorted cocaine like it was a competitive sport, Rod found a creative workaround. To protect his raspy golden pipes, he stuffed coke into cold capsules. Yes, the kind for sinus relief, and swallowed them like vitamins. Because who says you can't be health conscious and high? Still beneath the glam and the swagger, there was a man dancing dangerously close to the edge. He partied with royalty-romanced supermodels and staggered through years in a haze of charm and champagne. But time, like fame, eventually sobers you. Rod mellowed. He swapped out wild nights for sold-out tours and well-aged suits. His voice stayed raspy. His stories even better with age. Because legends don't always burn out, they evolve. Sometimes with a smirk and a perfectly tailored blazer. Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, the toxic twins that almost imploded Aerosmith. They weren't just bandmates, they were a walking, strutting, screaming natural disaster. Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, better known as the Toxic Twins, didn't just party hard, they turned it into an art form. If you were within 5 miles of an Aerosmith tour bus in the late 70s, chances are you got contact drunk. Steven Tyler once said he spent millions on drugs, and most of it was well spent. Joe Perry, right there beside him, trading riffs and rails night after night. On stage, they were electric. Off stage, they were a mess of slurred words, broken friendships, and hotel bills that looked like military budgets. Their substance-fueled antics didn't just shake stages, they nearly tore the band apart. By the early 80s, Aerosmith was a shadow of itself, drowning in its own decadence. But the comeback. That's where the story changes. They sobered up, reunited, rebuilt the band, and came back swinging with Walk This Way, this time walking straight. Tyler and Perry proved that even the most toxic duo can find clarity, harmony, and a second act louder than the first. Because sometimes rock bottom is just the opening act. Lemmy Kilmister. One bottle a day keeps immortality in play. Lemmy wasn't just a rock star. He was a monument etched in leather, fueled by Jack Daniels and Louder Than God. As the frontman of Motorhead, he growled through amps like a tank through a brick wall. His drink of choice, Jack and Coke. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For decades, Lemmy reportedly drank a bottle of Jack Daniels every single day. Not a glass. A bottle. That paired with chain smoking and a diet that made fast food look like kale somehow didn't kill him until he was 70. And even then, death had to knock twice. His lifestyle wasn't just wild, it became myth. Fans didn't ask if Lemmy would survive the night. They asked if the night would survive Lemmy. But here's the thing, he showed up. Always. No matter how blitzed he played with the fire of a man who meant it. And when the fire dimmed, he didn't fake it. He faced death the same way he faced a riff head-on, no apologies. Because Lemmy wasn't pretending to be immortal. He just made mortality wait its damn turn. Ace Frehley. Spaceman on stage, freefaller off it. Before he was spiraling through life, Ace Frehley was soaring across stages in silver boots, shooting smoke from his guitar like it was NASA certified. As Kiss's original spaceman, he brought swagger shred and enough makeup to terrify a department store. But Ace didn't just play like a rocket, he lived like one plummeting back to Earth. Alcohol became his co-pilot. From backstage to after parties, Ace was rarely seen without a drink, and often barely seen with one. His solos were legendary, but so were the blackouts, missed rehearsals, and public meltdowns that slowly pulled him out of orbit. Eventually, the band said enough. Ace left Kiss in the early 80s, a casualty of his own chaos. But here's where the story bends toward hope. He didn't crash. He climbed back. After years battling addiction, Ace got sober, picked up his guitar again, and reminded the world why he mattered. Because even spacemen fall. The brave ones, they suit back up and fly again. Jim Morrison, the Lizard King of Chaos. Jim Morrison didn't just sing for the Doors. He unraveled on stage in real time. With a stare that could melt glass and lyrics soaked in poetry and pain, he made madness magnetic. He was the Lizard King prophet of the counterculture, and the only guy who could turn a concert into a courtroom. Alcohol wasn't his vice, it was his muse, his monster, his microphone. He drank to feel free, then drank to feel nothing. Some nights, he delivered haunting, hypnotic performances. Other nights, he slurred poetry into the mic, while the band tried to keep the train on the tracks. And then there was Miami, where Jim allegedly exposed himself on stage and launched a media firestorm. Public indecency, arrest, chaos as usual. But beneath the wildness was a deeply haunted man, searching for meaning in a bottle, and sometimes finding only the bottom. He died in 1971, just 27 years old, in a bathtub in Paris. No autopsy, no answers. Just myths, mystery, and music that still burns decades later. Because Jim didn't just live fast, he burned like a comet, bright, beautiful, and gone too soon. Janis Joplin, Southern Comfort and a Soul on Fire. Janis Joplin didn't sing, she ached. Every note was a scratch on the soul raw and roaring like heartbreak, set to blues. With a voice that could shatter glass or stop time, she became the queen of rock's aching heart. And in her hand, always a bottle of Southern Comfort. Janis drank like she sang with abandon, with urgency, like tomorrow wasn't promised. The whiskey wasn't just a drink. It was armor, escape, and sometimes companion. She was the outsider who stormed the gates of a man's world, with wild hair, no apologies, and a laugh that could crack a room wide open. But the loneliness lingered. Behind the electric stage presence was a woman aching for connection, often drowned out by the very noise that made her famous. She joined the 27 Club in 1970. Another bright light gone too soon, found alone in a hotel room with a needle and silence. Yet her voice still echoes. Not polished, not perfect, but powerful, untamed, unforgettable. Because Janis didn't come to be pretty. She came to be real, and that's what made her eternal. Ronnie Wood, rolling, rocking, and eventually recovering. Ronnie Wood never quite stood still on stage or in life. As the wiry, ever-grinning guitarist of the Rolling Stones, he danced through decades of riffs, and more riffs, all while guzzling enough alcohol to sink a tour bus. In the 70s and 80s, Ronnie wasn't sipping, he was swimming. His drinking didn't just blur nights. It blurred band relationships, studio sessions, and even stage performances. Rehab wasn't a one-time pit stop. It became a revolving door with his name on it. And yet, he was always there, guitar slung low, smile crooked, somehow holding it all together with charm and instinct, even when he was falling apart. But eventually, the music caught up to the man. In the late 2000s, Ronnie chose recovery over relapse, and this time it stuck. Today he plays with the same fire but with clearer eyes and steadier hands. He tells stories of his wildest years with a wink and a laugh, as if to say, "Yep, I made it, somehow." Because some stones don't gather moss, but they do grow up. Eric Clapton. Tears in his beer. Eric Clapton made his guitar weep, but for a while he was too drunk to hear it. One of the greatest to ever touch 6 strings, Clapton lived in the spotlight, with fingers like fire and a bottle never far behind. By the late 70s, he wasn't just drinking, he was drowning. Entire concerts blurred into blackouts. He once confessed he played the legendary Rainbow concert completely hammered. Critics called it raw. Clapton just didn't remember playing. Alcohol numbed the grief, the fame, the pressure, but it also almost took everything. In the 80s, after a series of health scares and close calls, he reached the edge. One more drink and the music might have stopped for good. But Clapton did what many rockers don't, he chose to live. He got sober, faced the silence. And out of that silence came redemption, more music, deeper lyrics, and the kind of grace that only comes from losing yourself and finding your way back. Because sometimes the blues don't break you, they rebuild you. Iggy Pop. Bleeding, brawling, and becoming. If punk had a pulse, it probably sounded like Iggy Pop crashing into a microphone. Shirtless, slathered in sweat, or sometimes peanut butter, Iggy didn't just perform, he detonated. Every show was a collision of chaos, flesh, and raw electricity. But the madness on stage mirrored the war inside. In the 70s, Iggy drank like he lived recklessly. Alcohol wasn't just a lubricant for rebellion, it was fuel for his fury. His fear, his need to feel anything. Shows spiraled into bloodied chests and broken bottles. Behind every leap into the crowd was a man falling into himself. He flirted with oblivion so often it felt like part of the act. But it wasn't. Eventually, the destruction caught up. Iggy hit bottom hard, but he clawed his way out. He sobered up. Not overnight, not neatly, but he did it. And what emerged wasn't a tamed punk, it was a wiser one, still wild but no longer bleeding just to be heard. Because true legends don't lose their edge, they just learn how to aim it. Noel Gallagher, Wonderwall of Whiskey. Noel Gallagher wasn't just the brain behind Oasis, he was its mouth, its fists, and its unapologetic ego wrapped in a parka. The man wrote anthems that defined a generation, then nearly drank himself through the decade that followed. In the 90s, Noel lived like every tabloid headline was a challenge. Boozed up before gigs, hung over during interviews, and locked in a permanent pint-fueled sibling war with his brother Liam. Their backstage brawls became as legendary as their choruses. But it wasn't just rock star indulgence, it was self-medication. Fame came fast, and with it the weight of carrying a band, a brand, and a Britpop crown he never asked for. Alcohol blurred it all until it didn't. Eventually, the hangovers hit harder than the highs. Oasis imploded, the fights went public, and Noel walked away, guitar in hand, pint glass finally set down. These days, he drinks far less and writes with more focus. Not softer, just sharper. Because even in the blurriest years, Noel Gallagher never lost the tune. He just had to turn the volume down to hear himself again. Jimi Hendrix, drowning in purple haze. Jimi Hendrix didn't play the guitar, he spoke through it. Every bend, every feedback wail was a sentence in a language only he understood. He rewrote the rules of rock with fire fuzz and fingers blessed by something cosmic. But while his music soared, Jimi himself was crashing. Alcohol wasn't his only demon, but it was always nearby, lurking in hotel rooms, dressing rooms, and the back corners of clubs. Mixed with barbiturates, it turned nights into fog memories, into static. His charm could light up a room. His rage, fueled by drink, could clear it. On stage, he was transcendent. Off stage, he was tortured, restless, isolated, and haunted by fame he didn't know how to hold. In 1970, at just 27, Jimi was found dead in a London flat. Official cause asphyxiation, but alcohol and sleeping pills had done their quiet work. His life was a solo, brilliant, improvised, heartbreakingly short. Some stars don't fade, they explode, and the sky still echoes. Bon Scott, high voltage, hard liquor. Bon Scott didn't walk into a room, he swaggered usually with a bottle in one hand and a smirk in the other. As the original voice of AC/DC, his howl was pure electricity, rough, rebellious, and impossible to ignore. But the same fire that made him unforgettable was also burning him up from the inside. Bon drank like a man who thought hangovers were a myth. Whiskey was his fuel and chaos his compass. He'd stumble off stage and into the nearest bar or car, which tragically is where his story ended. In 1980, after a heavy night of drinking, Bon passed out in a parked car and never woke up. Acute alcohol poisoning, just 33 years old. His death hit like a lightning bolt through the rock world. But in a cruel twist of timing, AC/DC's next album, Back in Black, a tribute to Bon, became one of the best-selling records of all time. Bon didn't live long, but he lived loud and left behind a roar that still rattles the bones of rock. John Lennon, the lost weekend that almost lost him. John Lennon preached peace, but his lost weekend was anything but tranquil. In the early 1970s, separated from Yoko Ono and untethered from the Beatles, Lennon spiraled into an 18-month bender through Los Angeles, equal parts rock star cliché and emotional freefall. He drank not to rebel, but to forget the pressure of being a Beatle, to forget the silence Yoko left behind. With pals like Harry Nilsson and Keith Moon, every night turned into a blurry bar crawl through infamy. Fistfights, ejections, public meltdowns. He heckled bands, got thrown out of clubs, once tried to strangle a waitress. The man who once asked the world to give peace a chance was now giving bartenders hell. But eventually, the fog cleared. John sobered up, returned to New York, reconciled with Yoko, and became a stay-at-home dad trading scotch for stroller walks in Central Park. The fire never left him, but he learned how to let it warm, not burn. Because even a beetle can break. The brave ones know when it's time to come home. Brian Jones, the stone who sank. Before Mick strutted and Keith riffed, Brian Jones was the Rolling Stones. A multi-instrumentalist, a visionary, and the original face of the band, he brought blues to Britain and turned a scrappy garage act into something iconic. He became erratic, unreliable, and increasingly isolated from the very band he created. In 1969, the Stones let him go. Less than a month later, he was found dead at the bottom of his swimming pool. Cause of death, death by misadventure. A fittingly cryptic epitaph for a man who lived like a mystery. Brian Jones didn't burn out in front of stadiums. He faded quietly, tragically into water and myth. But play those early Stones records, and he's still there, ghost in the groove, haunting and brilliant. Sid Vicious, punk's prince of self-destruction. Sid Vicious didn't play bass well, some say he didn't play it at all. But what he lacked in musicianship, he made up for in mayhem. As the face of the Sex Pistols, Sid wasn't just a punk icon, he was punk's walking meltdown, sneering, staggering, bleeding charisma. Drunk more often than sober, Sid's love affair with heroin and violence was matched only by his doomed obsession with Nancy Spungen. Together they were punk's Romeo and Juliet, if Shakespeare had written with safety pins and switchblades. Their relationship spiraled into chaos. Screaming matches, hotel walls punched in blood and broken things. In 1978, Nancy was found dead, stabbed in a New York hotel room. Sid was arrested for murder, but never stood trial. Why? Because just months later, he overdosed and died. A final needle, a final fall. Age 21, Sid Vicious lived like a dare and died like a warning. But punk never wanted perfection. It wanted truth. And Sid, for all his destruction, gave it ugly, raw, and unforgettable.
Hollywood glitters with champagne and red carpets, but behind the spotlight, some stars were drowning, not celebrating. What if the greatest legends weren't undone by fame, but by the bottle in their hands? From a giant who drank to silence unbearable pain, to icons who forgot entire decades of their lives. These stories blur the line between myth and tragedy. This isn't about partying, it's about survival, self-destruction, and the haunting question, how much can a human lose before there's nothing left to save? Peter O'Toole. Most actors are afraid of being forgotten. Peter O'Toole lived something far stranger. He forgot himself. Not moments, not fragments, but an entire decade of his life disappeared into alcohol. The 1960s, the years that made him a legend, existed only in other people's memories. Awards, iconic performances, standing ovations. He achieved all of it without remembering any of it. This was not indulgence. It was erasure. On screen, he was brilliant, precise, unforgettable. Off screen, he was fading into a haze where time lost meaning and consequences no longer mattered. Directors quickly adapted filming him early in the day before the alcohol took over. Some even built private bars on set not as luxury, but as a way to contain the chaos. Keeping him close, even intoxicated, was easier than losing him completely. And somehow the illusion of control held until his body finally pushed back. When doctors examined him, the truth was devastating. His body was breaking down, his stomach nearly destroyed his life hanging by a thread. The warning was simple and absolute. One more drink would end everything. No second chances, no recovery, no escape. And for the first time, he listened. He stopped immediately. No gradual change, no hesitation. From complete surrender to total control in a single decision. Against all expectations, he remained sober for nearly 40 years, long enough to outlive the chaos, the damage, and the version of himself he could no longer remember. Sometimes the most powerful story is not about how someone falls, but about the moment they choose to stand again and refuse to disappear. Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins didn't slowly lose control, he vanished all at once. One moment he was driving, the next, nothing. When he came back to himself, he was sitting in a car in a different state, hands stained with blood, with no memory of the last 2 days. No explanation. No answers. Just silence and the terrifying realization that something inside him had taken over. For years, alcohol had been his quiet companion. It started as a way to silence doubt, to drown out the voice that whispered he wasn't good enough. But over time, that voice didn't disappear, it grew louder, more relentless, until drinking wasn't a choice anymore. It was survival. By his 30s, he was consuming 2 bottles of scotch a day, showing up to performances barely aware of where he was improvising entire scenes because he couldn't remember the script. But that moment in Phoenix, that blackout, changed everything. Sitting alone waiting for police sirens that never came, Hopkins faced something far more frightening than consequences: uncertainty. Not knowing what he had done, who he had become, or how far he could fall next. And in that silence, he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. On December 29, 1975, he walked into his first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. No drama, no announcement, just a quiet step away from the edge. And he never drank again. What followed wasn't just recovery, it was transformation. The chaos that once consumed him gave way to controlled discipline and a level of precision that would redefine his craft. Years later, he would step into one of the most chilling roles in cinematic history, delivering a performance so controlled, so exact, it felt almost inhuman. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando wasn't just an actor. He was a revolution. The man who redefined performance, who made emotions feel raw and dangerously real. Directors didn't just hire him, they depended on him. But somewhere between genius and indulgence, something began to slip. And when it did, it didn't crack quietly. It unraveled in full view of the world. At the height of his power, Brando became unpredictable in the most expensive way possible. He would disappear for days during filming, then return drunk, refusing to follow scripts, speaking lines that didn't exist. Entire productions bent around him, forced to capture whatever version of Brando showed up that day. Scenes stretched, budgets exploded, and chaos became part of the process. It wasn't rebellion anymore. It was loss of control disguised as brilliance. By the time he stepped onto the set of The Godfather, the legend was already fading beneath the weight of his own habits. Cue cards were hidden everywhere, taped to walls, props, even other actors, just so he could make it through a scene. The man who once commanded every frame now struggled to remember a single line. And yet somehow the performance was still iconic. That was the paradox of Brando. Even in decline, he was still extraordinary. But behind that brilliance was a quieter collapse. His body changed, his discipline vanished, and the industry that once revolved around him began to move on. What remained was not just a fallen star, but a reminder of something deeper. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't failure. It's believing that talent alone can outrun self-destruction. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart didn't drink to escape the spotlight. He carried the bottle straight into it. While other actors tried to maintain control, Bogart made alcohol part of his identity. Whiskey in the morning, gin by afternoon, scotch deep into the night. It wasn't occasional, it was constant, and somehow he made it look effortless. On set, the contradictions were almost unbelievable. He would arrive hungover, eyes heavy, body worn down from the night before, and still deliver flawless performances. Take after take, sharp and precise, as if the alcohol never touched him. But behind that control was a different story. Off camera, the calm dissolved into volatility. Fights broke out. Arguments escalated. The charm that audiences loved turned unpredictable, even dangerous. During the filming of The African Queen, things reached another level. In the middle of the jungle, surrounded by heat exhaustion and isolation, Bogart and director John Huston turned the production into a private drinking marathon. Bottles passed between take scenes shot through haze and sweat, reality blurring with performance. It wasn't discipline keeping the film together, it was sheer force of will. But the body always keeps score. Years of relentless drinking began to surface in ways that could no longer be ignored. The energy faded. The strength that once masked everything started to break. By the time the consequences caught up, it was too late to reverse anything. Illness took hold, and the man who once seemed untouchable was suddenly fragile. His final days carried a quiet irony. After decades of drinking without limits, he was left facing an ending that could not be negotiated. Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf didn't collapse overnight. His story is more unsettling than that. It began early, long before fame, when the line between reality and escape was already blurred. By the time Hollywood turned him into a global star, the damage had already taken root. Success didn't stabilize him. It amplified everything that was already breaking underneath. At the height of his career, when millions saw him as the face of blockbuster success, his off-screen life was unraveling fast. Arrests became frequent, each one stranger than the last. He disrupted live performances, shouted incoherently in public, and behaved in ways that felt less like rebellion and more like someone losing control in real time. One night he was dragged out of a theater mid-show. Another time he was caught on camera in a drunken rant so explosive it spread across the world within hours. It wasn't just scandal, it was exposure. What made it more disturbing was how visible it all became. There was no hiding, no quiet decline behind closed doors. Every mistake, every breakdown, every moment of intoxicated chaos was documented, replayed, judged. And beneath all of it was something darker. Allegations of violence, relationships marked by fear, a pattern that suggested the damage wasn't only self-inflicted, it was spreading outward, affecting everyone around him. Eventually, the spiral reached a point where it couldn't continue unchecked. Court-ordered rehab forced a pause, a moment where destruction had to face consequence. Since then, he has claimed sobriety, trying to rebuild not just a career, but an identity. But unlike some stories, this one doesn't offer a clean resolution. John Barrymore. John Barrymore was once considered one of the greatest actors of his time, a master of Shakespeare, a man whose voice and presence could command any stage. Audiences didn't just watch him perform, they believed him. But somewhere along the way, the brilliance that made him unforgettable began to dissolve into something far more tragic. And the transformation didn't happen quietly. At first it was just drinking, then it became everything. By the time he reached his later years, Barrymore wasn't just performing under the influence, he was barely holding on. He would stumble onto the stage with a flask hidden in his costume, slurring lines, forgetting entire scenes. There were nights when he completely lost track of the play he was in, mixing up Shakespearean monologues as confused audiences watched in silence. What once felt like genius now felt like watching a legend collapse in real time. The illusion of control was gone. His body began to fail him, his liver hardening, his health deteriorating in ways that could no longer be hidden. Yet the performances continued, not because he was still capable, but because he couldn't stop. Drinking had stopped being a habit. It had become his identity. And then came the end, just as unsettling as the life that led to it. He collapsed mid-performance, his body finally giving out after years of excess. But even in death, the story didn't lose its strange edge. There are tales of his body being taken, placed in a chair as part of a dark joke among friends, as if even death couldn't separate him from the chaos he lived in. Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage didn't slowly lose control. He spiraled into a reality so bizarre it felt almost unreal even by Hollywood standards. At one point, he had everything: an Oscar, global fame, and over $150 million. But instead of stability, success pushed him into something far more dangerous: excess without limits. He wasn't just spending money, he was burning through it. 15 mansions, a private island, collections of rare artifacts including shrunken heads. And in one of the strangest decisions, he bought a pyramid tomb in New Orleans, convinced it would somehow make him immortal. These weren't calculated choices, they were impulsive late-night decisions often made under the influence, where reality blurred with obsession. Then came the collapse. In 2011, police found him in New Orleans drunk, disoriented, arguing with his wife over which house was theirs. He stood outside a random property, insisting it belonged to him before challenging officers to arrest him. Blood on his face from punching cars. Confusion in his voice, a man completely detached from the world around him. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a breakdown captured in real time. Behind the headlines, the consequences were brutal. He owed millions in taxes, forcing him into a relentless cycle of work. Film after film, sometimes 5 or 6 a year, not out of passion but necessity. Directors reported he would show up, do one take, and leave. The actor who once commanded $20 million per film was now taking whatever he could get just to stay afloat. Because sometimes losing everything doesn't happen in a single moment. And by the time you realize it, the life you built is already gone. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed didn't just drink heavily. He turned drinking into something extreme, almost like a personal challenge he refused to lose. In an industry already known for excess, Reed stood apart. Not because he hid it, but because he made it impossible to ignore. He was known for pushing limits that didn't make sense. Not occasionally, but constantly. Stories followed him everywhere, from out-drinking entire groups of sailors to treating alcohol like part of his daily performance. Directors didn't try to stop him. In fact, some adapted to it. On the set of Gladiator, a bar was kept in his trailer because it was the only way to ensure he showed up and did his scenes. Ironically, when he was sober, he was often harder to control. But the moment that defined him came in Malta. While filming, Reed sat down with a group of British Navy sailors and began drinking. Not casually, but competitively. Pint after pint, he kept going, refusing to slow down, refusing to lose. Over 100 pints of beer. One man against a table full of younger opponents, and he won. Then shortly after, everything stopped. He collapsed. No warning, no long decline. Just a sudden end only hours after proving once again that he could outdrink almost anyone. His final bar tab had already been paid, as if even he understood how the night would end. The production had to spend millions using digital effects to complete his remaining scenes. Even in death, he remained part of the film. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner didn't learn to drink in Hollywood. She learned it long before the fame behind tobacco barns in North Carolina at just 13 years old. By the time she arrived in Hollywood, she wasn't just keeping up with the men around her, she was out drinking them, effortlessly, elegantly, and dangerously. Her life quickly became a cycle that never slowed down. Champagne at lunch, martinis by the afternoon, straight bourbon through the night. What looked like glamour from the outside was something far more chaotic up close. Nights didn't end. They escalated. Arguments turned into explosions, and parties turned into scenes no one could control. During the filming of The Night of the Iguana, things went further than anyone expected. She convinced director John Huston to abandon filming for a drinking contest. It didn't end at the table. It ended in the ocean, both of them fully clothed, drunk, and collapsing on the beach by morning while production fell apart behind them. And that was just one night. As time passed, the stories became harder to ignore. Hotel staff finding her at 3 in the morning in places she shouldn't be. Violent outbursts, broken glass, rooms left in chaos, relationships collapsing one after another, blurred by alcohol and memory she couldn't fully hold on to anymore. By the end, the image the world once admired had faded. Not suddenly, but slowly worn down by years of excess that never truly stopped. Andre the Giant. Before the myth became legend, Andre the Giant was already something the world couldn't quite understand. A man of impossible size sitting quietly at a bar drinking beer after beer as if it meant nothing. Dozens turned into hundreds, and soon numbers stopped mattering. Bartenders didn't keep count, not because they couldn't, but because it no longer felt real. And the strangest part? He barely changed. No chaos, no loss of control, just a steady, almost haunting calm. But behind that unbelievable image was a truth far more unsettling. Andre wasn't drinking for pleasure, he was trying to survive his own body. Every movement brought pain. His massive frame, admired by millions, was slowly crushing him from within. Doctors had already warned him that his life would be short, that his heart wouldn't endure the burden forever. And when a man knows his time is limited, the line between living and escaping begins to blur. There are stories that sound unreal, him collapsing in hotel lobbies too heavy for anyone to lift left there until morning like an unmoving monument. Entire bars emptied just to keep up with him. But strip away the legend and what remains is something quieter, heavier, a man drinking not to celebrate life, but to soften the weight of it. Because sometimes the most extraordinary stories aren't about strength at all. They're about how much pain a person can carry before they finally disappear. Mickey Rourke. There was a time when Mickey Rourke had everything Hollywood could offer, looks, talent, and a presence that made cameras fall in love with him. Directors trusted him, audiences admired him, and studios were ready to build entire careers around his name. But somewhere between the spotlight and the silence after it, something shifted. And what followed wasn't a fall, it was a slow, brutal unraveling. Rourke didn't just walk away from Hollywood, he punched his way out of it. Trading film sets for boxing rings, he stepped into a world where every hit left a mark not just on his body, but on his identity. And alcohol was always there, waiting in the corners, blurring pain and consequence. He showed up to fights drunk, took punches he couldn't afford to take, and watched his own face once his greatest asset becomes something unrecognizable. It wasn't just self-destruction, it was transformation in the most violent way possible. By the time the lights dimmed, the man who once lived among fame and luxury was sitting alone in a cheap apartment surrounded by empty bottles and fading memories. He would drink until he blacked out, waking up with no idea how he got there or who he used to be. And when he finally returned to the screen years later in The Wrestler, it didn't feel like acting, it felt like confession. Because sometimes the most powerful performances aren't created, they're lived. And Rourke wasn't playing a broken man trying to find his way back. He was showing the world exactly what it looks like when someone loses everything and still keeps going. Richard Harris. Richard Harris didn't just drink, he lived inside it. For him, alcohol wasn't an escape from reality, it was the reality. While others measured their days in hours, Harris measured his in bottles. Vodka to start, brandy to follow, port to finish, every single day like a ritual that never questioned itself. And somewhere along the way, the line between control and chaos didn't just blur, it vanished. There's something almost surreal about the stories surrounding him. At the height of his fame, he once forgot he even owned a Rolls-Royce left sitting in a garage for decades collecting dust and thousands in unpaid fees. But that kind of forgetting wasn't an accident. It was the result of a mind drowning in constant intoxication where memory itself became unreliable, and yet he kept going as if stopping was never an option. Then came the moment that changed everything. Doctors gave him a deadline, 18 months to live. His body was failing, collapsing under years of excess. Most people would have slowed down, held on to what was left. Harris did the opposite. He threw himself a 3-day farewell party, drinking some of the finest wine in the world as if daring fate to come faster. And then just as suddenly, he stopped. Completely. For a decade, he stayed sober. A man who once couldn't function without alcohol now lived without it. But addiction has a long memory. One drink, just one, pulled him back though, never as deeply as before. His story isn't just about destruction, it's about that fragile, terrifying space between control and collapse where one decision can either save you or slowly take everything away again. Michael Landon. Michael Landon looked like the perfect man America trusted. On screen, he was the ideal father, the moral center, the man millions of families believed in. But behind the cameras, that image was carefully holding together something far more fragile. Because while he was teaching values to the world, he was quietly losing control of his own life. His days didn't start with coffee. They started with vodka. At 6 in the morning before the cameras rolled, he was already drinking. By the end of the day, it had turned into a full routine, alcohol, cigarettes, and painkillers blending into something his body could no longer separate. The addiction didn't come all at once. It grew after a riding accident when medication opened a door that never fully closed again. From there, it became a cycle he couldn't break. On set, the illusion continued. Crew members worked around him, reminding him of scenes, guiding him through moments he should have been controlling. His makeup artist would spray perfume on him just to hide the smell of alcohol seeping through his skin. To the audience, nothing seemed wrong, but behind that image, everything was slipping. At home, it was worse. Bottles hidden everywhere behind books, inside tanks buried out of sight. His wife would find them, pour them out, and for a moment it felt like control might return. But it never lasted. The cycle always reset. By the time his body gave out, the damage had already been done. Officially, it was cancer, but the years of alcohol, cigarettes, and pills had already worn him down long before the diagnosis arrived. And near the end, there was one truth he couldn't hide anymore. He admitted he had been drunk through most of his children's childhoods. What they remembered wasn't the perfect father on television. It was a man who smelled like cologne and spoke with a slur. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just live a glamorous life. She lived a life that burned intensely, fueled by passion, conflict, and alcohol that never seemed to run out. To the world, she was beauty, power, and elegance. But behind closed doors, her life moved to a far more volatile rhythm, one driven by emotion and amplified by the bottle. Her relationship with Richard Burton wasn't just romance, it was combustion. They drank through breakfast, argued through the afternoon, and fell back into each other by night, only to repeat it all over again. Their connection was magnetic, but it was also destructive, with alcohol feeding every high and every collapse. Burton once described her as an ocean, someone who could drink endlessly and still remain standing. But it didn't start that way. What began as medication for back pain slowly turned into dependence. One drink became several, and eventually counting didn't matter anymore. She hid bottles in places no one would think to look, even inside her wigs, carrying her escape with her at all times. The control she once had slipped quietly, replaced by a need she could no longer ignore. Then came the turning point. After years of excess loss and emotional exhaustion, Taylor made a decision that few at her level of fame were willing to make publicly. She entered rehab, not in secret, not quietly, but openly, becoming one of the first major stars to admit she needed help. And unlike many others, she followed through. She rebuilt herself not just as an actress, but as a force beyond Hollywood. The same intensity that once fueled her destruction was redirected into purpose, raising awareness and millions for causes that mattered. Robin Williams. Robin Williams made the world laugh like no one else could. Fast, brilliant, unstoppable. On stage, he was pure energy, a storm of voices and characters that never seemed to run out. But when the lights went off, the silence was something else entirely. And that silence was where the real battle began. He had already seen what addiction could do. The night before John Belushi died, Williams was there, part of the same world, close enough to understand how quickly everything could end. That moment scared him. He walked away from cocaine almost immediately, refusing to follow the same path. But alcohol was different, slower, quieter, harder to escape. He called it a slow knife. It didn't explode his life overnight. It crept in. After performances, after the laughter faded, he would drink alone, trying to quiet the noise in his head. The same mind that made him a genius wouldn't turn off. And when he drank, it changed him. The warmth disappeared. The humor faded. What remained was someone darker, heavier, someone even those closest to him barely recognized. He tried to stop, and for years he did. But relapse doesn't announce itself. It begins with something small. One drink, one moment, and suddenly the control is gone again. Within days, it was no longer casual. It was routine. But even that wasn't the deepest problem. Behind everything was something far more devastating, something no amount of sobriety could fix. A disease slowly breaking down his mind, distorting reality, feeding paranoia and depression in ways he couldn't fight. In the end, the world saw the loss of a legend. But what they didn't fully see was the quiet war that had been happening all along. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn didn't just drink behind the scenes, he found ways to bring alcohol into places it was never supposed to be. When studios tried to control him, banning alcohol from set, Flynn didn't stop. He adapted. Using a syringe, he injected vodka into oranges, turning something harmless into a hidden supply that no one could take away. By the time filming started, he had already consumed enough to blur the line between performance and instability. His life followed the same pattern. Mornings didn't begin with clarity. They began with champagne in bed, what he casually called a breakfast of champions. By noon, it shifted to rum. By evening, vodka. Every day moved through the same cycle as if slowing down was never an option. The parties at his mansion became so excessive that even the name he gave it, Cirrhosis by the Sea, felt less like a joke and more like a warning no one took seriously. On set, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Studios assigned handlers just to keep him standing to make sure he could get through scenes without collapsing. During one film, he fell off his horse again and again, too intoxicated to stay balanced. Eventually, the crew had to secretly tie him to the saddle just to finish the shot. And instead of resisting, Flynn found it amusing. To him, it was all part of the experience. But beneath the charm, the recklessness, and the constant spectacle, there was a deeper pattern. A man who never stopped, never paused, never questioned how far he was pushing himself. Peter O'Toole. Most actors are afraid of being forgotten. Peter O'Toole lived something far stranger. He forgot himself. Not moments, not fragments, but an entire decade of his life disappeared into alcohol. The 1960s, the years that made him a legend, existed only in other people's memories. Awards, iconic performances, standing ovations. He achieved all of it without remembering any of it. This was not indulgence. It was erasure. On screen, he was brilliant, precise, unforgettable. Off-screen, he was fading into a haze where time lost meaning and consequences no longer mattered. Directors quickly adapted filming him early in the day before the alcohol took over. Some even built private bars on set not as luxury but as a way to contain the chaos. Keeping him close, even intoxicated, was easier than losing him completely. And somehow the illusion of control held until his body finally pushed back. When doctors examined him, the truth was devastating. His body was breaking down, his stomach nearly destroyed his life hanging by a thread. The warning was simple and absolute. One more drink would end everything. No second chances, no recovery, no escape. And for the first time, he listened. He stopped immediately. No gradual change, no hesitation. From complete surrender to total control in a single decision. Against all expectations, he remained sober for nearly 40 years, long enough to outlive the chaos, the damage, and the version of himself he could no longer remember. Sometimes the most powerful story is not about how someone falls, but about the moment they choose to stand again and refuse to disappear.
In the glittering world of Hollywood, where fame hides more secrets than scandals, some of the brightest stars carried a truth too dangerous to reveal. Behind the red carpets, million-dollar smiles and perfect love stories were men forced to live double lives, loving in silence and acting even off-screen. These weren't just actors, they were prisoners of fame. But when the curtain finally fell, their confessions shocked the world. Are you ready to discover the 15 secret gay actors Hollywood tried to keep hidden? Wentworth Miller, the prison break star who escaped his own prison. He was the face of brilliance and control. Michael Scofield, the man who broke out of prison with nothing but a plan and a tattoo. But what audiences didn't know was that Wentworth Miller was living inside a prison of his own making, one built not of concrete, but of fear. With his razor-sharp looks and calm authority, he became Hollywood's poster boy for masculinity. Yet behind the interviews and photo shoots, he was silently breaking apart. For years, Wentworth dodged every question about his personal life, deflecting with a polite smile. Rumors about his sexuality circulated endlessly, but he denied them all, not because he wanted to lie, but because he had to survive. Hollywood, even in the 2000s, was a place where one confession could end a career overnight. To the world, he was strong, perfect, untouchable. To himself, He was exhausted from pretending. Then came 2013, the moment that shattered the illusion. When invited to a film festival in Russia, a country infamous for its anti-LGBTQ laws, he didn't just decline. He sent a letter, bold, emotional, and honest. In it, he declared, "I am gay," refusing to appear in a place where people like him were persecuted. The letter went viral. Overnight, the quiet, reserved actor became a symbol of defiance. But Miller didn't stop there. In 2020, he announced he would no longer play heterosexual roles, saying he no longer wanted to pretend for anyone. His words divided Hollywood, but they liberated him. The man who once played a genius escaping walls of steel had finally escaped the invisible ones around his heart. Luke Evans, the leading man who refused to hide. With his commanding voice, chiseled jawline, and undeniable charisma, Luke Evans became Hollywood's vision of the perfect man. From The Hobbit to Beauty and the Beast and Fast and Furious, he embodied every kind of hero, bold, strong, and irresistibly confident. On screen, he was the man women wanted and men wanted to be. But off-screen, Luke Evans carried a truth that Hollywood warned him to bury. Born in Wales, Luke started his career in musical theater, performing in London's West End long before Hollywood knew his name. There, he lived openly and proudly as a gay man. No secrets, no apologies. But when his fame began to rise, agents and producers whispered the same old warning, "Don't talk about it. If people know, it could end everything." It was the same fear that had silenced generations of actors before him. For a while, Luke chose silence. Not out of shame, but out of exhaustion. He didn't fake relationships or feed tabloids with lies. He simply stopped explaining himself. "I'm an actor," he once said, "not a politician. My private life is my own." That quiet strength became his weapon. He didn't need to make grand statements. His confidence spoke louder than any denial. Years later, Luke shattered the illusion of fear when he began appearing at events with his partners, living freely and unapologetically. Fans loved him more, not less. The world had changed, and Luke helped it change. He had become the rare Hollywood star who could be both masculine and openly gay without apology. Today, Luke Evans stands as living proof that authenticity doesn't ruin careers. It redefines them. Jonathan Bailey, the Bridgerton heartthrob who changed the game. Jonathan Bailey became the talk of the world when he stepped into the role of Anthony Bridgerton, the proud, passionate, and dangerously charming Viscount of Netflix's Bridgerton. With his piercing stare and commanding presence, he embodied everything Hollywood calls leading man material. Yet while audiences were falling in love with his on-screen romance, Jonathan was quietly fighting a battle that no costume drama could ever portray: the struggle to live authentically in an industry still haunted by prejudice. Before the fame, Jonathan was a theater-trained actor, mastering Shakespeare long before he became a household name. But in his early career, the warnings came fast and cold. Agents told him that if he came out as gay, he could kiss leading roles goodbye. "The public won't believe a gay man can play straight," they said. For years, those words echoed in his mind, a cruel reminder that honesty could cost him everything. But Jonathan refused to let fear dictate his story. Instead of hiding behind a false image, he chose silence on his own terms. Not to deceive, but to protect himself until the time was right. That time came with Bridgerton. When the series exploded in popularity, Jonathan took control of his narrative and proudly came out publicly. And the result? Fans didn't turn away, they embraced him even more. In a single moment, he shattered one of Hollywood's oldest myths, that love on screen loses power when the actor lives it differently off-screen. Jonathan Bailey proved the opposite, that authenticity adds depth, not distraction. Today, he stands as one of the few leading men redefining masculinity and romance for a new generation. Elliot Page, the star who rewrote his own story. Elliot Page was once Hollywood's darling, the witty, sharp, and unforgettable star of Juno, Inception, and X-Men: Days of Future Past. To the world, he seemed unstoppable, young, talented, and adored. But behind the success was a painful truth. Elliot was living a life that didn't belong to him. Every red carpet, every magazine cover, every beautiful actress headline was a reminder of the role he never chose to play. For years, Elliot endured the pressure of Hollywood's expectations, forced to present a version of himself that felt like a costume. The disconnect between how the world saw him and who he really was grew unbearable. Then, in 2014, standing before a crowd at the Human Rights Campaign conference, he finally spoke, coming out as gay in one of the most emotional and heartfelt speeches of the decade. His voice trembled, but his message was clear. He was done hiding. That moment made headlines around the globe. But it was only the beginning. 6 years later, in December 20th of 20, Elliot made another life-changing announcement. He was a transgender man. The reaction was overwhelming, a mix of shock, admiration, and profound respect. For the first time, Elliot wasn't just performing a role, he was living his truth. Transitioning in the public eye wasn't easy. The scrutiny was relentless, but so was his strength. He shared openly about the relief of finally recognizing himself in the mirror, about the joy of simply existing freely. And instead of losing his career, he gained something far more powerful: purpose. Today, as the lead in Netflix's The Umbrella Academy, Elliot has become one of Hollywood's most inspiring voices, using his platform to advocate for acceptance and equality. Colman Domingo, the powerhouse who redefined strength and pride. Colman Domingo isn't just an actor, he's a force of nature. With his commanding presence and emotional depth, he has lit up the screen in Euphoria, Fear the Walking Dead, and the Oscar-nominated Rustin. But behind his effortless confidence lies a story of quiet resilience and unwavering authenticity. As a black gay man in Hollywood, Colman faced a double barrier, one of race and one of identity, yet he turned both into fuel for greatness. Born in Philadelphia, Colman didn't have the luxury of shortcuts. He built his career from the ground up, one performance at a time, driven by a belief that truth is stronger than fear. Early on, he realized that being openly gay in a world still defined by stereotypes could limit opportunities. But he refused to let that silence him. "I am who I am," he once said, "and that's my power." Unlike many who felt pressured to make public statements, Colman chose a different kind of revolution, simply living authentically. He married designer Raul Domingo, not with a publicity stunt or headlines, but with love and peace. Together, they've become one of Hollywood's most respected couples, a living example of what it means to succeed without compromise. In his performances, Colman brings the same honesty that defines his life. Whether portraying a civil rights leader or a complex modern character, he injects truth into every line, every gesture. His mere existence in these roles challenges the system, proving that strength, beauty, and vulnerability can coexist in one man. Colman Domingo didn't need to come out with drama. His life itself is a statement. In a world obsessed with fitting in, he stands out by simply being real. Dan Amboyer, the Hollywood prince who dared to be real. Dan Amboyer had all the makings of a classic Hollywood leading man, handsome, polished, and endlessly charming. From his breakout role as Prince William in William and Catherine, a royal romance, to his appearances in Younger and The Blacklist, he was the picture of the perfect on-screen gentleman. But behind the tailored suits and confident smile, Dan was quietly living in the shadow of Hollywood's oldest fear, that being openly gay could end a career before it truly began. As his fame grew, so did the pressure. Producers, agents, and PR teams whispered the same warning: stay quiet. Don't ruin the fantasy. For years, Dan lived by that rule, playing the roles the industry expected of him, both on and off screen. But deep down, He knew the price of pretending was far too high. Then, in 2017, he decided enough was enough. In a simple but powerful public announcement, Dan came out as gay, and on the same day revealed that he had married his longtime partner, Eric P. Berger. The news stunned fans and media alike. But rather than scandal, it was met with applause. His honesty didn't destroy his image, it humanized him. In interviews, Dan spoke openly about how difficult it was to balance authenticity with ambition. "I didn't want to live someone else's version of me," he said. "I wanted to live mine." His decision became a quiet act of rebellion, a declaration that truth matters more than perception. Today, Dan Amboyer may not dominate the tabloids, but his impact runs deeper. He represents a new generation of actors who refuse to choose between success and sincerity. By stepping out of the shadows, he didn't lose Hollywood, he illuminated it. Ricky Martin, the pop icon who finally set himself free. For years, Ricky Martin was the embodiment of passion and perfection, the global superstar whose voice, energy, and charm made the world dance to Livin' La Vida Loca. He was the ultimate sex symbol, the heartthrob who electrified every stage, the man every magazine crowned irresistible. But behind the bright lights and screaming crowds was a man silently suffocating beneath the weight of an image that wasn't his own. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Ricky's fame was unstoppable, and so was the pressure. The music industry had created a character, the seductive Latin lover, and he was expected to play it flawlessly. Every interview, every performance, every smile came with the unspoken rule: don't let them know. Rumors about his sexuality circulated endlessly, but he dodged them with charm, afraid that honesty might cost him everything he'd built. By 2010, the lie became too heavy to carry. In a heartfelt open letter shared on his website, Ricky Martin finally spoke the truth that had been buried for decades. "I am proud to say that I am a fortunate homosexual man." The world stopped. Fans were stunned. But what followed wasn't rejection, it was love. His words weren't just a confession, they were an act of liberation that resonated across cultures and generations. Ricky later shared that the hardest part wasn't coming out to the world, it was coming out to himself. For years, fear and shame kept him silent, but once he embraced his truth, his life transformed. He became a father, a husband, and a global advocate for LGBTQ+ rights, using his fame to fight against the same prejudice that once silenced him. Ricky Martin didn't just break barriers in music, he broke the chains around his heart. Jim Parsons, the quiet genius who redefined success and authenticity. For over a decade, Jim Parsons made the world laugh as Sheldon Cooper, the brilliant yet socially awkward scientist from The Big Bang Theory. With his deadpan humor and impeccable timing, he became one of television's most beloved stars and one of its highest-paid actors. But while millions adored the character who feared change, Jim himself was living through one of the most profound transformations of all, learning to exist without hiding. Unlike many of his predecessors, Jim never lived a double life. He didn't stage fake romances or play the tabloid game. He simply lived quietly, honestly, and without spectacle. In 2012, at the height of his fame, he confirmed publicly that he was gay. A statement so natural and understated, it felt less like an announcement and more like a truth the world already knew. "I've never been anything else," he once said with his trademark calm confidence. Behind the laughter, there was wisdom. Jim understood that authenticity doesn't need drama, it needs dignity. His long-term relationship with art director Todd Spiewak became one of Hollywood's most respected partnerships, not because of fame, but because of its simplicity and sincerity. When the couple married in 2017, fans celebrated not just their love, but what it represented: a quiet revolution in a noisy